Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It is getting dark where I am, so I am trying this lighting. I prefer natural light, but I'm having to use the lights in my apartment. So here we are. Anyway, we are back to talk about episode 2 of the Scrubs revival. It is called My Second First Day. First off, I do want to say if this is your first time being here, welcome to my channel, Recaps and Reacts with me, Sarah, where I talk about shows that I love, movies that I love, where I recap them mostly, and I do talk about my reactions. So if that's something you're into, please think about subscribing. I talk about everything really, and one of these things, Scrubs. I mentioned in my first video that I did watch Scrubs when it aired back in the day, and I was very skeptical about them reviving or rebooting this series. My brother was the first one to tell me that, and I was like, oh gosh, because you know how you can reboot something and it will ruin the series. But so far, I've absolutely loved it. And also, I don't know if this is a reboot. I would say mostly a revival because it's literally, they're just picking up right where they left off. But it kind of in a different way, but it's seamless. It works. So yeah, I'm in, like I said on my first video, I loved the first episode. It was a pleasant surprise. And here we are to talk about the second episode. So let's get into it. So again, like I mentioned before, the second episode is called My Second First Day. So this is JD's first day as the chief of medicine. So if you remember on the first episode, he accepted the job that Dr. Cox gave him, which was Dr. Cox's job of chief of medicine. We find out that he's going to have a celebratory dinner. The hospital is throwing for him to be the new chief of medicine. And then Turk says if no one shows up, then at least you get to eat their cake. Just remember that because that'll touch on a moment that at the end of the episode. Turk gets JD a gift for him being the chief of medicine, and it is like a little friendship bracelet that one of his daughters made, his youngest daughter made, I believe. So one is a cream bracelet and the other one is a brown bracelet, and it says two chiefs, I believe. And the cream is for the vanilla for JD, and the brown is for chocolate for Turk. And JD says, I'm gonna take the chocolate one, please. And so they exchange the bracelets and they wear the bracelets, and then they come up. JD's like, we have to come up with a cool handshake, and I think it's called Two Chiefs, I believe, something like that. So they're so corny, but you love it. You just love their friendship. It's so cute. And so yeah, so they do that. JD is doing his first rounds with the interns, and he's trying to find out what his teaching style is. He's trying to be kind of tough like Dr. Cox is, but we all know JD's not like that. While JD is trying to figure out his teaching style, he does his first round with the interns, and Dr. Tosh, if you remember, who's the influencer, like the medical influencer on the last episode, she's just answering all the questions correct, and JD calls her hot mouth, and that ends has JD having to be in HR office for Sibby, if you remember from last episode. I think she's HR, but she says you called an intern hot mouth, which, I mean, y'all can figure that out. Like, it's not the best nickname. But JD, being innocent, he was like, well, it's because she was getting every answer correct. She was on fire. And she says, JD, or Dr. Dorian, and he says, I know, I need to bring it down a notch. And she says, leave hand gestures to me. She says, when you think about having a nickname, you need to stop and think. So I guess that is going to be JD's hand gesture. And so after that, she says, I have a long meeting, and she brings out this thick file, and we all know who that probably is. Yes, it is the Todd. So the Todd has, as we can see, he's making progress, but he still has not changed. Okay, y'all. My phone is telling me I don't have a lot of storage, so I need to Get it going. So, anywho, we find out that JD's walking down the hallway and he's coming up on the chief of medicine pictures, and he looks at Dr. Cox and says that he does not want to let him down. And Dr. Park comes in and is like, "You're going to let him down." Dr. Park just kind of mentions has a whole monologue basically saying how he's better for the job than he is, and then JD has an inner monologue, and his inner thoughts are saying, just like in the movies, every hospital has a villain and a hero. So we're already setting up this dynamic. I do think that Dr. Park is kind of taking the place of Dr. Cox, because you know how Dr. Cox used to bust JD's chops all the time. And so I think Dr. Park is going to be that place for JD. And so Dr. Park also tells JD that he doesn't stop until he gets what he wants. So we're going to see how that all comes out. So JD is doing the rounds with the interns, and we see Asher, who is the British doctor. I don't think I mentioned his name on the last video, but the British doctor's name is Asher. And Blake, Asher tells Blake that they don't have each other's numbers. And Blake says, "Yep, that's right." And welcomes back his patient. So meanwhile, we cut to Elliot, who is, I believe she's the chief of the simulation program at the hospital, which I believe is responsible for the training, and the technology that they use is really dated. So she asks JD if they can get a better program, or excuse me, if they can get better technology. And JD was talking to her about it, and he was like, "Man, we had that stuff when we were interns." And so JD, without looking at the budget, tells Elliot that they can have new technology for the simulation program, and Elliot's happy. And then at that moment, we also cut to Turk talking to the interns about the new surgical robot that they're going to get, and how none of them better touch that robot. So we have new technology for the simulation program, and now we have Turk talking about getting a new surgical robot. So we'll figure out how that's going to work out. Okay. Back with the interns, so they're in, the room where they're trying to sleep, because they do like crazy hours at the hospital. So they're in the room with the bunk beds, and Tashana, Dr. Tosh, and the other intern that I don't know her name, the surgical intern, they're all and they're trying to sleep. However, Dr. Tosh is doing a TikTok, and Tashana is like, "Can you knock it off? Because I'm trying to get my REM sleep." And the other intern tells Dr. Tosh that she's an inspiration to her, and Tashana's just kind of like, "Knock it off. I'm trying to sleep." And so Dr. Tosh stops the TikTok. So back with Asher. Asher has a patient. I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode. Asher has a patient who is there. His name is Stanley, and he had asked him earlier if he was being med compliant, and Stanley said that he was, but they got the labs back, and it turns out Stanley has not been med compliant. And Stanley says, "Well, it's been really hard with my insurance. I can't afford to take the pills as I'm supposed to. I have to take one pill like every week, versus I think he's supposed to take them like every day or something." And yeah, so this is a second instance where they're kind of talking about the healthcare system and how it's hard to afford. So Asher talks to JD and says, they leave Stanley, they talk to JD, or Asher talks to JD, and Asher is like, "How is anyone supposed to not get sick in this country?" So then they are interrupted with Dr. Park yelling at the interns, because I guess he's doing rounds with some other interns, and JD does not like that interaction. And JD tells Asher that he's going to change how it is here, and he tells Asher to basically do what you can to get Stanley his medicine. And Asher's like, "Well, what about my other patients?" And Blake says, "I'll cover." And so with that being said, Asher goes, he gets on the phone, and he is trying to get the insurance for, or trying to get, or figure out a way for Stanley to get his medication through his insurance. Asher tells JD that he is his dream mentor, and of course, JD loves that. We're then introduced to two charge nurses. JD wants to give them nicknames, but you have Sibby in the background that does. So he does not give them nicknames. And the charge nurses find out that JD is, in fact, Elliot's ex-husband, and they had not met him before. And so they feel a type of way about him because they've heard that JD has allegedly cheated on Elliot, which is not true. Excuse me. And so they kept referring to Elliot as the queen, the beautiful queen. And so they don't like JD because they think that JD cheated on Elliot. So JD goes and confronts Elliot, and he says, "Have you been telling people that I've been cheating, that I cheated on you?" And Elliot's like, "No, but you know how hospital gossip goes. Like, once it gets started, you can't really control it." JD just tells Elliot that he's concerned because, he's the chief of medicine. He actually cares about what people are saying about him. And Elliot understands, and she thanks him for approving her simulation lab upgrade. We cut to Tashana having a conversation with the other intern that I don't know the name of, I don't know yet. She's talking to her about Dr. Tosh and how she tells her that you need to stop fangirling over Dr. Tosh. And so the other intern says, "Okay, I will." She's like, she's just an inspiration to me. She's like, whatever. And she kind of starts like teasing, or not teasing, but making fun of her, mocking Dr. Tosh. And Dr. Tosh overhears the conversation and says, "I'm sure I wasn't supposed to hear that, but I'm glad I did," and then walks off. And Tashana's kind of shocked, and the other intern is like, "Oh my gosh, I have second-hand embarrassment for you." So JD and Turk have a conversation, and JD asks Turk if he heard anything about the cheating rumors, and Turk says, of course he did, because that's hospital gossip, but just know that I backed you up and said that she was a Brazilian model named Valentina. And he then tells Turk that he's concerned about what people will think about him because he's the chief of medicine. And Turk says, "Look what you did for Asher. This man is on the phone trying to get insurance or get medication for his patient, and you did that. And I'm proud of you." And so they do their handshake, two chiefs, and they walk off. JD walks into his office and he sees Dr. Park there eating popcorn. And he's like, "Is there something I can help you with?" And he says, "No, I'm just here for the show." And then Dr. Turk comes in and says, "JD, I'm being told that my funds are frozen because you're trying to approve a simulation lab for Elliot." And JD's like, "How did you hear about that?" And then Turk says he got a call from, or Dr. Park told him. And then Elliot storms in and says, "JD, I can't get my simulation lab because Turk's getting this robot." And then he's like, "How did you hear about that?" And he said, or Elliot says that she got a text from Dr. Park. Then Sibby comes in with Asher and gets onto JD that while Asher was on the phone, he said some not appropriate words, and everyone heard him. JD tells everyone to get out and he will figure it out. Then Dr. Park goes to JD and says sarcastically how great of a job he's doing, and says, "If you would have looked at the budget, you would have known that the simulation lab will cost you money, whereas the surgical robot will generate money for you." And he says, "Do him a favor, look at the budget so we can all have jobs." Ooh, burn. Then we see Elliot and Turk together, and JD talks to them together and says, "Elliot, I can get you your simulation lab because it's going to cost us too much money, but the robot will generate money," and he apologizes. And then Turk walks off as well with a look on his face like, "Ooh." JD then tells Asher that he needs to focus on his patient. And Asher says, or his patient, his caseload. And Asher says, "Are you serious?" And he says, "I'm dead serious." And Asher says, "Well, I took a Hippocratic oath and I feel like I'm harming Stanley if I don't try to get his insurance. And JD says, we don't have time for that. We can do what we can, but that's Stanley's problem. You need to focus on your other patients. And JD tells him that he has a hospital to run and he leaves. We then cut to Turk celebrating with his interns about getting the surgical robot by doing the actual robot, and Elliot sees it. And Elliot says, Turk apologizes, and Elliot says, I don't even know why I tried. I'm not surprised. You're always going to come first, and then walks off. And then Turk goes and follows Elliot, and he's like, what was that? And this is in front of the 2 charge nurses that I talked about earlier that was getting on to JD. So we already know that the 2 charge nurses love Elliot. So yeah. So anyway, the 2 charge nurses are now looking at this fight between Turk and Elliot. And, Turk confronts her and says, what was that about? Elliot says that JD's always going to prioritize you. And then Turk says, Elliot, you sound crazy. And then the other nurse, the male nurse, says, did he call her crazy? And Elliot looks at him, the nurse, and says, yes, Francois, he did call me crazy. And then she walks off. And Turk turns to the 2 charge nurses and said, y'all are supposed to be on my side. And they said, why? Because you're black? And he says, no, because we're black. And Francois says, you don't get preferential treatment. That is a beautiful queen. And then she has been through too much. But here's some lotion, baby, because your elbows are ashy. And he was like, what? And so he puts some lotion on his elbows and he walks off. And then Francois says, that man's fine as hell. I'm never going to tell him that, but he'll never know. And then the female nurse says, baby, because he's just going to do you wrong. So that was a funny moment. Tashana then is practicing giving her apology to Dr. Tosh with the other intern that I don't know the name of. And Dr. Tosh actually sees Tashana or overhears Tashana apologizing, and she appreciates it. She also tells them that she's like, look, I know what I do is crazy, but I get a lot of brand deals through these TikToks. And she's like, I've paid off all my student medical loans. And Tashana's like, what? You don't have any more student loans? And she's like, no. And she's like, wow, that is inspirational. So now she has a new respect for Dr. Tosh. Turk then finds Elliot in the break room and tells Elliot that she is right. JD does prioritize their friendship over Elliot. And Elliot says, it's not even about the funding. She was just like, after the divorce, like, I met you and JD at the same time. And you don't even talk to me anymore. And Turk says, I guess I just don't know how to deal. Like, I don't know what to do after the divorce. And Elliot, like I mentioned a few moments ago, says that, I met you and JD at the same time. Like, you're my friend too. And I just miss my friend. And she had tears in her eyes, and then they embrace and Turk apologizes. On his way to his celebratory dinner, JD sees Asher talking with a patient, and the patient hears Asher's accent, and she says she's gonna go to England soon, and she was asking him about things to do. And Asher, who normally has really good bedside manners, is just kind of like, you need to lower your blood sugar, or you need to start taking these pills, lower your blood pressure or whatever. Just very monotone. Absolutely zero bedside manner, and JD did not like what he sees. And Asher goes and talks to the rest of the interns, and they ask him, it's Blake and Dr. Tosh. And Blake and Dr. Tosh asked him if he's okay. And he was like, I don't know if this is what I signed up for. So JD is concerned. And we see him looking at a picture of Dr. Cox, the chief of medicine, and it looks like he wants to reach out to Dr. Cox, but they take his picture, so he looks at a picture of Dr. Cox, and it looks like he's going to reach out to Dr. Cox, but then he realizes that he is in fact the chief of medicine now, and everything relies on him. So you see him get on the phone and call for another doctor. Then we cut to Blake and Asher, and Blake tells Asher to give him his phone. They exchange numbers, and Asher is kind of geeked about it. And Blake says, "Don't get excited, and if you get crazy, I will block you and change my number." And Asher says, "Thanks." And then they leave. Then JD comes in and has a bag full of the medications that Stanley needs. And JD tells Asher that he had to call some friends, some colleagues, and pull some favors. He's going to have to do a lot of seminars, lectures, things like that. But that's all he could do. He then tells Asher that, to be very clear, we cannot do this for every patient. So he said, you're going to meet a lot of Stanleys in this world during this job. And he's like, if you let every single one of these stories give you heartbreak, this is going to be a very short career for you. Asher understands that, and and JD also mentions how he is actually, in fact, going to call Stanley's insurance company and try to get in contact with a doctor for the medication, but we're not going to be doing this for everybody. So he tells him to go home and get some sleep. We then cut to JD having the closing monologue because this is the end of the episode, and he has his inner thoughts, and he says that every doctor wants that hero moment. And then it cuts to Asher giving the medication to Stanley, and he tries to shake his hand, but Stanley kicks it out of the way and just embraces him and gives him a big hug. Then JD says that sometimes those hero moments are also tedious, and it cuts to him being on the phone with Stanley's insurance company trying to get in touch with someone. JD ended up missing his celebratory dinner because he is on the phone with Stanley's insurance company, and Dr. Park is there, and Dr. Park takes JD's cake and eats it. JD also mentions that when work gets too much, there's always someone there to patch you up. And then it cuts to Elliot and Turk at the simulation lab, and Turk is doing a surgery on one of the dummies with Elliot. And then we see Dr. Tosh, Tashana, and the other intern partaking in one of the little brand deals that the TikTok that Dr. Tosh was doing earlier with Tashana was getting annoyed. They're all wearing like the little eye mask that she got from her TikTok brand deal. And so they're all fangirling and having a moment. So now they're all getting along. And for the closing credits, we have JD in the office, still in the office on the phone with Stanley's insurance company. And Turk comes in and gives him a piece of his cake from the dinner. And he said that the food was fire. And JD tells him that he does not have to stay if he wants to go. And Turk says, I don't want to stay. He says, I do want to go, but I'm going to stay because it's bracelet code. And then they do an air shake. They go to Chiefs. And then JD notices the cake is caramel. And he says, ooh, speaking of caramel, so what is it that me and Valentina got into? And then Turk starts telling him the stories of the rumors that he was spreading about the supposed mistress that JD cheated on Elliot with. And then at that very moment, a human comes on the phone from Stanley's insurance company. And JD says, now you want to answer? And that's how the show ends. So that is the second episode of Scrubs, the Revival. Again, A++++, great episode. We see all those moments. We miss those moments of how, those teaching moments that Scrubs does so well. Just love the cast. Love it. I love the new cast. I like what we have going on so far. I will miss not seeing I don't know if Dr. Cox is going to be on the show, to be honest. I know he did another show on Apple, right? Or excuse me, not Apple, on Max, HBO Max with Steve Carell, I think called Rooster. So that's fixing to come out. So I'm pretty sure he was there doing that show. But I do hope he makes some other appearances. Of course, Carla, Hooch, the Todd. I want to see like other recurring characters. Dr. Kelso, that would be fire if he comes back for an episode or two. And of course, the janitor, Neil Flynn. We haven't seen him. I don't know if he's going to make an appearance, but I'm excited to see what we're going to see. Rest in peace, Ted's character. Yes, that would be nice to see, maybe like a kind of I forgot what they were called, but you know, the group that would, the a cappella group that would sing, that would kind of be cool to see. A rendition of that, like a newer version of that would be cool. So yeah, we'll see. We're only in the second episode. I think there's 9 episodes. So I will be back next week to talk about episode 3 of Scrubs The Revival. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I will get back to you. Yeah, and so I will see you next week. Thank you. Bye.